lived in. When my father went into the U.S. Air Corps during World War II, Mama had 3 girls. I'm the oldest, then Linda, Kathy, and she moved from a rental house into this 12-family apartment building because it was easier, it was cheaper, and it was just easier to deal with. But it was an apartment house of women, families, but all women, because the men were all gone. And one of the people that lived in that house was Miss Janie Kilgore. Miss Janie Kilgore taught civics at Piedmont Junior High School. That's the only thing I knew about that school. And she had taught my father when he went to Piedmont Junior High School. In those days, Charlotte was a small enough town that you went into these schools and your parents had been there and they knew them, and you know, you couldn't get away with much is what it all boils down to, is that it was a small, larger town. That's what it was. So I knew that when I went into Piedmont that I would know at least one person there, and it was going to be Miss Janie, and I knew that I would recognize her. Everybody would recognize her. She was a short woman. She had close cropped hair. She always wore sort of burgundy colored man-styled suits. But the most distinctive thing about her, actually, I thought she was old, but she probably wasn't really when you think about it. But she drove a burgundy Chevrolet coupe. And she would drive into the driveway, which was very long, and would go to the back where there was 2 lines, 6 garages back to back, you know, so that everybody in the apartment house had a garage. And sometimes I met her when I was 8 years old, and now I'm going to Piedmont Junior High School, and I'm 12. So sometime during that period of time, I carried her groceries, and she'd give me a dime or a quarter, you know, or helped her with if she had a heavy load of things coming home from the school, books, papers, or briefcase, or whatever. We weren't really fast, huggy friends, but she always nodded. We knew each other. And I was going to know one person in that school. I loved junior high school. I loved everything about it. Loved it. From the first moment that I walked in the door into Miss Phoebe Reynolds' homeroom in the 7th grade, I loved it. I loved the desk. I loved the fact that we had a schedule to change classes. There were new people. I had a chance to start my life over. Have you ever felt that way when you went to a new school? In the 8th grade, I changed my name. It was a bad choice, and so I didn't keep it very long. Especially since my mother came to PTA and didn't know who they were asking about, so she sort of blew my cover. And the only person I knew there at first was I would see Miss Kilgore in the hall, wave to her, and she would wave back. Well, I had an experience about a year ago. Jim and I went to Charlotte. I was telling stories at my elementary school where I started the 1st grade. And my mother had gone to that school, and I went there to tell the story of the day I started the 1st grade. My father left for World War II. It was a really neat, memory-loaded thing. And as long as I was in town, I rode over a half a mile to go back into Piedmont Junior High School. I hadn't been back in that school building since I walked out of there at the end of the 9th grade. And this was, after all, a few years later. And I walked up the steps. It was the same steps. There'd been renovations, but I was going in just as I had the day of the 7th grade. And I opened the door, and I remembered how you used to just walk right in and right into Miss Reynolds' classroom. Well, I couldn't do that this time because that was now the girls' bathroom. But the doors on the hallway to the right, there were 4 big doors. And I told Jim, I said, I know what's in there. And I pushed the doors open, and it was the auditorium. It was the auditorium. It had been refurbished, but not changed. There was still a stage at the front with heavy burgundy velvet curtains hanging there. And in the back, there was a balcony so that you had a little roof thing that then more doors went out, and then you could sit up top. And the seats were all those old-time wooden seats screwed down to the floor with the metal arms, and the seats flopped up and down and creaked and squeaked. They'd redone them, but they still did all those musical things. There was a class up on the stage, and I walked in and I sat down in one of those seats for a few minutes, and I could remember so many things. I mean, you know, in the 7th grade, I was in a chorus, and I sang a verse all by myself in a Christmas carol. And then in the 9th grade, I was in an operetta, and I had a solo. I was never a lead, never. But I was this old gypsy woman with her hair all whitened down, wearing my grandmother's black crepe dress with lace on it. Chanita was the name of that thing, and I was singing this thing for the young pretty girl who was going to get the boy. I was the old gypsy woman that was very popular in the 40s. But as I sat there, I remembered another memory of being in that room. I was president of the 9th grade. I was president of the Junior Honor Society. And it was a wonderful thing at the end of the year. We took in the new members. And as the president, I was to stand on the stage and do the presentations. And my grandmother was so proud of me for that that she bought me a new suit. It was plaid. It had a pleated skirt, a little jacket. And I looked to the back, and my father was standing at the door underneath the balcony. He had come to see the program. My mother couldn't come because she was in the hospital having my brother. So that was such a sweet thing. I could just, that Daddy had come, he'd taken off work, and he'd come to the program. But associated with that honor society was one of the worst memories, the only bad memory I had of high school, junior high school. In the fall, we had a party. It was the big thing for the year. Miss Kilgore, I was now working very closely with because she was the advisor for the Honor Society. And I learned something new about her. That her way was the best way, and that's how you had to do it. Whether you were in her civics class and you had to put your name on a piece of paper at just exactly a right place so that when she flipped through them, she could see whose papers she had, or whether you wrote the list for the grocery store for the party in just exactly the right way, and you picked, it had to be done her way. Oh, well, okay. There was only one thing about that party. It was going to be a sock hop. Now, I don't know how many of you remember those, but a sock hop was going to be in the gym. And because you were going to be on the wonderful basketball floors, you could not wear shoes in there except sneakers or basketball shoes. So for a sock hop, everybody came with shoes on, left them out in the hall, and you came in to the gym in your sock feet. We were going to have music, a record player, some food, lots of fun, and people could bring a date. This was the 9th grade. We were not drivers. We were still having to be picked up, walk to school, or whatever, but we could have a date. You remember those days? That was death to me. Now, I did a lot of things in junior high school. I was selected to do a lot of things, but I didn't have a poodle skirt, and I didn't have any elf shoes, and I wasn't a girl that anybody was calling to meet them at the movies. Boys only came around my way if they wanted help with their homework or they wanted some other kind of help or something. I was on the chubby side. I still have a very good friend that I met in the 7th grade in Phoebe Reynolds' class, and I love Bill dearly. But if he opens his mouth one more time to call me pork chops, he is probably in danger of his life. We are beyond that. But he will do it, and I still feel the humiliation of that name to this day, and I get all red in the face. Well, I didn't have a date. Now, you didn't have to have a date. I wanted to have a date. You could ask somebody that wasn't a member of the Honor Society to come with you as your date. I didn't want to go with a group of girls. I thought I was now beyond that. What gave me that idea, I have no idea, but I thought I was beyond wanting to date. So I decided that I would ask someone. I started checking out everybody in my class, you know, to see who was a good prospect, who I didn't know was already calling somebody else up and going to the movies with. I didn't want to do that. I wanted somebody that was unattached, where I wasn't going to get in any trouble for calling them. I looked at some and they looked cute, but they didn't turn around and look at me as though I was cute. So I thought, you know, that's not going to work. Now, I was good at the books, but I'd never gotten an A for my decision-making abilities. And I picked out a target for my invitation. His name was Carson McLean. He was tall. I loved him tall. He was tall, had blonde hair, freckles. He was definitely cute. And he was the star of the basketball team. I had noticed in the hall that he always seemed to be surrounded by a group of girls that were wearing elf shoes and poodle skirts. But I didn't put that into my brain to sort out that that was what he really went for. And so I called him up and I told him what I wanted, and I invited him to go to the party with me, and he said yes. You remember that feeling? I was beside myself. Number one, that I had actually done it, and number two, that he had said yes and that I was going to be going, because actually, as the president of the group, I had a few little duties to do when I got there, etc. I decided that I would spend the night with my friend Margie, because she lived closer to the school, and it would be less for us to walk than our house, which was a little further away. So I was to come over to a house that afternoon, and Carson was to come and pick me up at 7 o'clock, and Joe Riggs, who was going with Margie, was to pick her up at 7 o'clock, and that would give us plenty of time to get down to Piedmont, which was about 15 minutes walk from there, by 7:30. I got all dressed up. My mother rolled up my hair. She brushed it out. It really looked good. I had a red sweater with a little white collar and a pleated skirt, plaid pleated skirt. I bought a pair of white socks so that I would be wearing new socks, so that when I took off my penny loafers, my socks would be perfect in every way. Well, I got dressed, Margie got dressed. Joe arrived right on the minute, absolutely on the minute. And they waited for 15 minutes or so, and then when it was clear that it was getting on towards 7:30 and that they better make tracks or they wouldn't get there in time, they left. And I had this heaviness in my chest and this sinking feeling that Carson McLean was not coming to take me to the Honor Society party. I was being stood up. Oh. Margie's mother was lovely. She hugged me. She tried to make me feel better. Margie's father sort of had a few words to say about anybody that would do that to such a sweet one girl as I am. And I agreed. How could he do this to me? Well, he had done it. And then the phone rang. And Mrs. Malone picked it up, and she came back, and she says, "It's for you." I had hope in my heart, but it was Miss Kilgore. And she said, "Where are you?" I said, "Well, I'm still here at Margie's. You're supposed to be here for this party." And I said, "Miss Kilgore, I can't come. My date hasn't come." He stood me up. "Nevertheless, you have to come. Wash your face, brush your hair, and go out on the front porch, and I will be there for you in 10 minutes. Well, I knew her well enough over the years that I was not going to argue with that. I was going to do what she told me to. So I was standing on the front porch when she drove up in her burgundy red Chevrolet coupe. She honked the horn, and I ran across the yard, and I got in. And she said, "You have to go to this party." I said, I can't go. I can't go." She started up her car, and we were driving down, and I said, "Miss Kilgore, you've got to understand this. I cannot go in that room. It's humiliating." And she pulled over under a street light. "Ellouise, you will go. You will stand up tall. You will hold your head up high. And you will not let that boy do this to you. You are better than that. You will not let him do this to you." And she drove on. We got to the school, and I sort of took deep breaths and got out, and I went in, took my shoes off and left them in the hall, and I went in. There was music, there was dancing. My friends, the people that were there, were very sweet to me. They did not rub it in. They did not make me miserable. They were very kind. And somehow, at the end of the evening, when it was time to go home, my friend Bill, probably having been talked to by Mrs. Kilgore, came up and said, "I will walk you home." I loved him forever for that night. We had a great time walking with Margie and Joe and laughing and talking and cavorting as you do when you're that age, running up the highway. But it didn't end there. You see, I was going on to Central High School with all of those same people. All of those people who knew what had happened to me, who knew how embarrassed, how bad I had felt. So my high school years were a little tainted. I lost a lot of weight, I got a lot cuter, and I actually had boyfriends and did a lot of other things. But always in the back of my mind was this haunting memory of how I had been humiliated that night at that party. You know, those memories stick with you, don't they? They just color everything you look at forever. So 25 years later, Jim and I went to my 25th high school reunion at Central High School. It was in the auditorium at Central High School, which was a half a mile that way, and the seats had been removed, and we were all gathering. And you know how those things are. You have on a badge that has your 18-year-old picture on it, and everybody's looking at your 36-year-old face and trying to get you together, you know, to see who you are. And as I walked across the room, I saw this little gaggle of men. And so two of them standing right closer to me, I recognized right away, and I went over to say hello. And from the back of that group, somebody called out and said, "Ellouise, well, have you forgiven me yet?" And my 14-year-old self recognized that voice in an instant. Was this his apology? I didn't think so. He was actually holding me up in front of all his cronies now to remind them what he had done. To make, you know, a joke of me again. And I just took a breath and I looked, yeah, he was still tall. He was standing up over most of the rest of them. He still had blonde hair, not as much as he had had. He still had freckles, they're a little bleached. Been working in the sun, could see that. And I just looked him square in the eye and I said, no, and I never will. And somebody said, Ellouise, don't be that way. Don't be that way. And by that time, I had turned around and I was walking back where my prince was waiting for me. And all I could think of was, thank you, Miss Janie Kilgore. Thank you very much.